Hi, my name is Ashley and I'm a mom of 2 little girls. I have a 3-year-old named Kylie and I also have a 14-month-old named Mia. In today's video, I'm going to be tackling a very hotly debated topic in the world of parenting, and that is discipline. Today's parents are so incredibly lucky. We have Google and the internet at our fingertips and in our pockets so that we can look up the answer to literally anything we're wondering on any given moment's notice. And while this is a wonderful thing, especially when it comes to emergencies that we might have with our children, it can be our saving grace, that last little bit of sanity that we need. It can also contribute to the insanity that we sometimes feel as parents because it is just information overload. There's almost too much information being thrown at us sometimes, and it can leave us feeling very confused at times. And honestly, this could not be more applicable than it is to the topic of discipline, because back in the day, new moms and dads, they did not have any of those resources. Typically, when they had a problem or they had a question about their child or how their child was being raised, they went to friends and family and they solicited opinions from those who were closest to them and applied whatever they learned from those people to their situation. It was a bit of a trial and error process, but they figured out what worked for them that way. And while today's parents still do those same things, we also have this whole other world of information that we can access whenever we want. And because of that, we're becoming aware that there are so many different possibilities when it comes to different types of parenting approaches. And to make matters just even a little bit more complicated, we have all of this new scientific research and evidence coming out that lends support to certain types of parenting approaches. Having a scientific professional background myself, I do tend to err on the side of scientific research and evidence and what that is saying about how certain parenting approaches affect the development of children. And for many people, that's a really hard pill to swallow because the scientific research stands in such stark contrast to what our parents did and how we were raised. And no one wants to think that their parents raised them in a way that perhaps wasn't ideal. But the fact of the matter remains that as time goes on, we do learn new things. We do learn the error of our ways as humans. That is how we have advanced as a civilization. So I don't think that there's any shame in saying that, yeah, maybe perhaps our parents made a few mistakes, but they were working with the tools that they had given their current time in history. And if you've been following my channel for any amount of time, you are probably already familiar with the fact that I am a huge proponent of positive discipline techniques and respectful parenting. If you have not already seen my first couple of videos on positive discipline that I put out a very long time ago, I will leave them in the description box down below for you guys to check out later. And those include some very general techniques that can apply to children and even adults of all ages, really. I personally have been very successful using all of the techniques in those videos with my children, but having siblings in the house has brought on a whole different ball game of things to tackle. And what's perhaps most exciting for me is that all of these strategies fit so perfectly into the ideals of raising children in a Montessori home. So from one busy parent to another, today I'm going to be sharing with you a bunch of strategies on how to promote a positive sibling relationship and how to manage all of the inevitable conflict that's going to happen along the way. Positive discipline, even with just one child, is a paradigm shift for most people in thinking about how to discipline a child. Traditionally, when many people hear the word discipline, they think of punishments and consequences, and that could not be further from the truth because at its root, literally, the word discipline means to teach. If you are teaching, then you are not yelling, you are not spanking, you are not placing a child in forcible isolation, otherwise known as timeout. You are not withdrawing your love from your child in any way to make them suffer in order to change their future behavior. In this video, we're focusing on discipline as seen through a lens of respect, love, and connection with our child, where emotions are safe and okay to have. If you are seeking to cultivate the type of relationship with your children that fosters cooperation from a place of love, as opposed to blind obedience based on fear of you and what might happen if they don't cooperate with you, then I sincerely believe that this approach is going to be something that meshes well with your personal philosophies. So without further ado, let's dive into the strategies. So the first strategy is arguably the most important one because it lays the foundation for all of the other strategies that we're about to discuss. And it is important whether or not you're doing this with one child or 2 or 3 children or a whole house of kids. And that is to acknowledge all bad feelings. The fact of the matter is, when there is more than one child in the house, bad feelings are going to arise at some point. And while no parent wants to hear one child say, "I hate her," or "I wish he was never born," or anything in that category of horrible things to say about your sibling, it might happen. While you are certainly not encouraging your child to have terrible, hateful feelings and expressions of anger toward a sibling, you also need to help them to realize that it's acceptable for them to express those feelings to you and to feel safe in doing so. Kids will say things sometimes out loud in moments of anger where they just can't contain their emotions and they just say the most hurtful thing that they can think of right in that moment. And even as adults, I'm willing to bet that we might not be proud of it, but there may have been moments like that for us as well. So you can probably understand where that is stemming from. And so just to remind yourself as a parent that they more than likely don't actually mean what they're saying, but like I said, they do need to feel safe enough to express that anger however it comes out. However, a line does need to be drawn and a limit needs to be set if your child starts to express this sort of anger in a physical way, because it is our job as a parent to protect our children and make sure that they are not getting hurt and they're not hurting each other. So as a rule of thumb to remember for yourself, all emotions are acceptable, but not all behavior is acceptable. And the way this would play out in real life is something like this. Let's say, for example, you come into the room where your 2 children are having a very intense argument over a toy. The first thing you need to do is identify with both of their feelings in a very objective, non-judgmental way where it doesn't seem like you're taking either of their sides. You might say something like, "You sound really angry." And if your child is crying already and you know why he's upset, or maybe he starts going on about why he's upset verbally to you, it's then important that you reflect back what you hear them saying so that they feel understood. And it could be something very simple like, "You really wish he would ask before he took things from you." And then if the other child has something to say about it, then you would do the same thing for them. Identify their feeling, restate back what it is they're saying. This way they can hear each other's perspectives from a neutral place. And many times just being able to be heard and express their emotions safely is enough to dispel what's going on. Now, of course, to a degree, how this plays out is going to depend on your children's ages, because a younger child is obviously going to need more help in expressing what's going on and perhaps maybe even needing help in waiting their turn with you and finding something else to do until the toy then becomes available. However, with that said, let's say one sibling has actually hit another sibling or bitten them or pushed them down or something physically violent that we don't want happening. Then it is your job then to step in and make sure that you are stopping those types of hurtful actions. And it doesn't need to be with yelling or being stern even. It's just a simple getting down at the child's level and saying, "I can't let you do that. Hitting hurts." And from this point, our natural inclination when we see one of our children hurting another one is to go into fight or flight mode. We feel like we need to do something right then and there, and this child needs to understand and learn through some hard punishment or consequence just to show how much we really mean business, that hitting is not okay or whatever happened between the 2 kids. And we don't need to go there. This is most certainly from a more traditional way of thinking about the term discipline. Again, punishments and consequences. Whereas with respectful parenting and positive discipline, we need to remember that we are teaching our child. We're not there to dole out consequences because they've made a mistake, a very developmentally appropriate mistake, especially if they're very young. We need to coach them and teach them what it is they should be doing and give them the words that they can use to fix the problem without using physical violence. And it's as simple as giving them an acceptable way to show their feelings. You tell them, I can't let you do that. Hitting hurts. I want you to use your words next time and tell him, I don't want you to take that toy. I'm still using it right now, but you can have a turn when I'm done. Children, especially young children, like toddlers and preschoolers, we have to remember that they don't instinctually know that that's an option. They just know that they're filled with this emotion that's causing their whole bodies to have this reaction that they can't control, and it just kind of pops out in whatever the first feeling is that they have. So remember, our job is to coach them and teach them and provide them with these alternative tools. And if they have never seen this play out in real life, then they might not have experience with those tools to draw from. So giving them the words that they can use and offering an alternative and maybe even role-playing it with them at a more neutral time after it's happened can really go a long way to avoiding it happening again in the future. And you would use the exact same approach if you were perhaps having a conversation with just one of your children about their feelings toward their sibling. So for example, if you have a young child and maybe a baby, a new sibling that has just entered the house, and your young child is showing a lot of frustration that you can tell is most very certainly stemming from the addition of a new child to the family, or maybe if that child even just says outright, I wish the baby wasn't born, or something that's really kind of shocking to you as a parent, it's important that you don't negate their feelings. You don't immediately respond with, oh, you don't feel that way, or no, you don't hate your sister, don't talk like that. We can't negate their feelings. It has to be safe for them to feel those things and to be able to express them to you, because otherwise they're just gonna stuff them down inside, and those feelings are going to come out at a later time inevitably in some other way that may be even less desirable than them just shouting that. So if your child does have some sort of an outburst or expresses some of these negative feelings about a sibling to you in some way or another, it's important that you hold that space open for them to have those feelings, and that you respect that they're entitled to feel that way. After all, a new sibling basically wrecked their life as they knew it. It's important to use the same approach. You identify their feeling. You say, you sound really frustrated. And then you restate back whatever it is that they're saying to you, if they're saying anything at all. And if they're not saying anything, then you can just maybe offer what it is that you think is happening. You can say, it's really frustrating to have to wait while I nurse the baby, I know. And as I said earlier, sometimes just feeling understood and knowing that you acknowledge how they feel is enough to help them process these emotions that they're having. But if it's not, then you might see them go into a full-blown meltdown or tantrum from having had this type of interaction, conversation with you, and that's okay. You know, that's another place where it has to be okay for them to have those feelings and have those emotions. And your job is not to help them or do anything necessarily. You're just holding that space open, as I've said, and just allowing them to have those feelings, and just know that you're there with open arms, with a hug when they're ready for it. So the next strategy is to avoid comparisons. And this one is really, really tough for parents to do sometimes because it's natural. We're constantly making these little comparisons without even realizing it throughout each and every day. And the more that we draw these comparisons between the children, the more competition and resentment we're going to create between the siblings. So with younger children, where you have maybe a toddler or preschool or even elementary age child and a young infant in the house, our natural inclination a lot of the times is to say something like, oh, don't XYZ like a baby to the older child. Or sometimes it will come out as, even the baby doesn't do that to the older child. Or we'll say, you're the big girl, you're the big boy now, so I expect you to blank. And then sometimes it will come out as, well, she's the baby, so she blank. Or, well, he's littler than you, and that means that you have to blank. And even though as parents, we know that our older child is fully capable of conducting themselves in a much more mature fashion, and maybe they are acting a little bit babyish, it's important that we're not verbally beating them down with that reminder constantly, because in your child's eyes, they still are your baby, no matter how old they are. And we don't want to do anything to squash that feeling of loving connection and that you care about them just as much as you do this cute new cuddly little baby in their life that has suddenly thrown everything out of balance for them. And with older children, it might sound something more along the lines of, well, why can't you behave like your brother? Or maybe you'll use their name and say, why can't you be more like Anthony? And it happens sometimes even conversationally, saying things like, well, you know, your sister does this, so XYZ. All of these types of phrases draw very explicit attention to the fact that you are comparing that child to their sibling, and it doesn't feel good to be compared to anyone else because we want to be valued for our own individualism. So it's really important when you are dealing with a situation with one child to not bring the other child into it, because really it's not going to be helpful to sit there making comparisons and perhaps making that child feel worse about themselves or about something that they've done in light of the other child. It's just not helpful at all. So here's a more specific example. Let's say one of your children is very neat and orderly and the other child is a bit of a mess. You know, they're like the Pigpen character from Charlie Brown constantly. And you know that to be the case. Well, there's no reason to compare your child, the messy one, to the neat one. Knowing that their sibling is much neater than they are is not going to motivate them to be neater themselves. That is something that is within them that they need to work on and cultivate as they grow and develop. So it's important that if you're trying to get this messy child to clean something up, that you don't sit there and say, you know, why can't you be more organized like your sister? She puts all of her things away when she gets home from school. She doesn't just throw her jacket on the floor and leave her shoes in the middle of the foyer. You know, it's really annoying and I'm constantly tripping over your shoes. Because if you take a moment to think about it, you know your child is not sitting there thinking to themselves, wow, she or he, if it's dad, is really right. I really should be more like my sister. You know, that's, you know, I'm gonna go clean up my shoes right away. That is not where their brain is. They're just thinking, ugh, that goody two shoes. They're constantly going on and on about her and how special she is and how organized she is. And it's harboring feelings of resentment toward the sister at that point. So again, not helpful at all. Instead, a much more neutral, better approach to this that leaves the sibling out of it entirely is to just describe what it is that you see. So you would just say, hey, Eric, I see a shirt on the floor. Or if the child themselves is drawing a comparison to something that you don't want to capitalize on. Say, for example, your older child does something that they know the baby can't do, like they've gotten themselves dressed. And they say, look, I got dressed all by myself. Instead of responding with something like, yay, you're a big girl now, or something that, again, draws that comparison, all you need to say is, you must be so proud of yourself, and leave it at that. There does not need to be a comparison between the older child and the younger child, or the messier child and the neater child, or whatever the dichotomy might be. The next strategy is to make sure that you are loving your children uniquely, not equally, because equal is not always better. And what that means is that you are valuing and respecting each of your children for their individual personality, character traits, and not just equally across the board because they're all your children. Your child needs to get the message and truly believe with every fiber of their being, based on your interactions with them and your words and how you guys treat each other. They need to truly believe that you love them for them, that you are the only you in the whole wide world, and that's why I love you. Sometimes children, older children, will very explicitly put you in a position where they'll ask you flat out, like, You know, do you love her more than me, or who do you love the best? And sometimes it comes off playfully, but children really are seeking that affirmation in their hearts when they ask you these kinds of questions. And it's critical that you do not respond with, well, honey, I love you all the same, because that's not what they want to hear. They need that reaffirmation constantly that you love them for who they are, that they aren't just another number in your family. And so you can respond exactly as I said. You can say, you know, you are the only Rachel in the whole wide world in my life, and I just love how you blank, 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 you know, name a couple of things that you really, truly, genuinely love about her, and just let her bask in that affection and that you notice those things about her. And that would be the best way to respond. You also want to make sure that you're giving each child what they need according to their individual needs, not necessarily just in equal amounts because you need to divide everything equally. And this applies in a variety of different areas, not just doling out your love to your children, but also things like your time and food even, you know? As children get older, they might say, oh, well, you gave her more than I got, or she has more pieces than I do. And parents often feel flustered to make sure that everybody has an equal amount so that there are no arguments. But as a parent, your job is to make sure that you're giving them what they need. You know, you're not gonna give a baby and a toddler the same amount of food just to keep it equal. You know, a baby has smaller nutritional requirements than an older child does, and so it goes the same way with older children even. And the same goes for your time. You can't say, okay, well, I'm gonna spend an hour with this child and an hour with that child, because there are going to be times when one child is going to need your attention a little bit more. And this is especially true when you perhaps have a new baby in the house. Your older child is going to have to learn how to adjust, understanding that the baby does need more of your time and attention, at least in the beginning stages, and that's just a fact of life. And they have to understand that just because the baby is receiving more time does not mean that you love the baby more. You're just giving them what they need in that moment. And that may be hard for an older child to come to terms with, but as we said earlier, if you're acknowledging all bad feelings and you're holding the space open for them to have those feelings and reassuring them that it's safe and okay to express those feelings to you, then it's going to help them come to terms with it eventually a lot sooner than if it were not the case. And finally, when it comes to loving uniquely, not equally, it is important that if a parent truly feels that they have a favorite child, maybe they're very open about that with themselves and willing to admit, yes, I prefer this child to the other one for whatever various of reasons, or maybe it's not something that they're openly willing to admit, but they kind of feel like, oh, maybe I am playing favorites a little bit sometimes. That is most certainly not going to foster a positive sibling relationship. So you need to take steps to make sure that you are fixing that if you have been showing favoritism toward one child or another. And just a quick example that I can think of where it wouldn't be like overt favoritism just because. Say for example, you have a child in the house who maybe has a disability of some sort, and they tend to be a little bit more in need of your help and assistance. You might accidentally be showing favoritism toward that child and shoving the more capable child aside, or maybe giving them more responsibility because they are more capable, and showing favoritism that way. So if you are doing anything like that, it's important, again, that you assess it and take steps to fix it. This way you are fostering a positive relationship between the two kids and not creating any unnecessary resentments. The next strategy is to avoid reinforcing sibling roles. And we already lightly touched upon one of them in a previous strategy, and that is to make sure that you are not accidentally casting expectations on your children based on their birth order. So, well, you're the oldest and you're the middle child and you're the baby and things like that. Another thing to be on guard for is siblings not excluding one another or excluding themselves because of a certain sibling that has a special area of competence. So oftentimes we see this when one child excels at academics and the other one excels at sports, for example. Or maybe one of your children has a special talent for playing the piano or some other musical instrument, and your other children maybe don't quite have that level of ability. It's important that we're not reinforcing and helping our children reinforce for themselves that they and they only have a right to these areas that they excel in, and saying things like, oh, well, your sister, she always has good grades, and why can't you have good grades like her? And making sure that we're not condoning our children having these conversations with themselves all the time, saying things that might seem trivial in the moment, but can really have an impact because they are putting themselves in a certain role or casting their sibling in a certain role and saying, oh, why do you want to try out for basketball? You suck at sports, or something along those lines. You really want to do everything you can to mitigate this, because otherwise you'll end up with a situation where your child might purposefully exclude themselves from an area that they feel they're not good at because of a sibling who is. And that's just not fair. You want your children to feel that the world is their oyster and that anything is possible as long as they put enough patience and effort into it. You can also avoid accidentally reinforcing other types of roles. For example, when you have two children who perhaps one plays the role of victim all the time and the other one plays the role of the aggressor, you don't want to just jump into a situation and assume that the aggressor was the responsible party. You don't want to run in and say, what did you do again? What did you do to her? Or whatever it is that you normally say, and assume that they are to blame, because oftentimes the other child played a role in getting the aggressor to that point. And so there is something to be said for both parties. And if you can avoid doing that and just focus instead on attending to the injured party immediately and modeling that that is the most important point in that current moment, and then attending to the aggressor later, that will also give you more time to assess what really happened. And again, not reinforce those roles even by accident. And if you have an older but young child, like a toddler or preschooler, and a baby in the mix who are interacting, you might find yourself in this situation a lot, because our immediate thought when we hear something loud, some commotion going on between the two of them, is to assume that the older child who knows better has done something to the younger child to cause the problem. And we cannot jump to that conclusion immediately. A lot of times babies, they provoke the older child to get to that point of feeling really frustrated and something happens. So again, it's important to not reinforce that role from the very beginning. A much more neutral approach that does not reinforce these types of roles is to just go in and objectively describe what you see or hear. You can just say, oh, I hear crying, what's going on? Or, oh, I see two kids yelling at each other, what happened? And take it from there. The next strategy is how to handle fighting between siblings, which is inevitably going to happen, be it verbal or physical. So the way you're going to handle this is almost in tiered levels, kind of depending on what's going on. So let's start at baseline, level 0. If you hear your children kind of bickering, the normal type of arguing, nothing is really happening per se, then your job at this point is to not intervene at all. Give them an opportunity to work it out themselves. Next level up is if things seem to be escalating. You feel like, this is not sounding so good, and an intervention is probably going to be necessary. First, you're going to acknowledge bad feelings. You look so frustrated, and oh, you're really upset. And then you're going to objectively reflect each child's perspective out loud so that they can both hear it. It's for both of their benefits. So you're gonna say, you really wanted to play with that right now. And then maybe to the child who the toy was taken from, you can say, you're really frustrated that he didn't ask permission before he took the toy. And then you're going to objectively describe the problem and express your confidence in their ability to problem solve on their own without you. One toy and 2 kids, that is a problem. I think if you guys think about it hard enough and you talk about it with each other, I think you can find a solution that works for both of you. And then leave and give them that opportunity. The next level up is when the situation is escalating so much that it could be potentially dangerous for one or both of the children. And I think as a parent, you would kind of have that gut feeling when you start to feel a little uneasy, it might be possible. And so at that point, you would need to go in and first inquire, like, what's going on? So Say for example, you have two rambunctious boys and they just love play fighting all the time, but you hear something that just sounds like maybe it's escalating beyond that. You would go in and say, hey guys, wait a second, is this a real fight or a play fight? And then remind them of the rule. You know, remember the rule is it's only okay to play fight if you're both okay with it. If it is getting to a point where you know it's a little too rough, somebody's going to get hurt eventually, then you need to just set that limit and say, you know, I know you guys are just play fighting, but this is a little bit too rough for me and I'm not okay with it. You need to find another activity, and hold firm on that. The next level up is when the situation is definitely dangerous. There's no questions about it. You've walked into something that it's very clear that somebody is about to get hurt if you don't intervene. So you don't need to yell, you don't need to be super stern, you just need to be firm and assertive. You say, hey, I see two kids that are really angry and they're about to hurt each other. It's not safe for you guys to be together right now. Let's go cool off in our own rooms for a little bit, and then you separate them. And the final tier of how to handle sibling fighting is if it's a continual bigger problem that cannot be resolved in a single incident. It's something that is ongoing, that maybe perhaps one sibling brings to your attention, or that you are just noticing in general is constantly happening. That calls for something a little more formal that sends a clearer message to your children that we need to work together to figure something out. And the general strategy for something like this is to call almost what amounts to a mediation meeting. So first, you're gonna sit down with the children and very objectively state what the reason for the meeting is. And then you're gonna explain the ground rules. Then you're gonna give each child an opportunity to express their feelings and concerns. And as they're expressing these, you're going to be writing them down. And when each child is done, you're going to read them back out loud so that everybody can hear them, so that the child knows that what they said was very clearly understood, and so that the other child can hear it as well. Following this, each child is allowed some time for a rebuttal. And then from there, everybody contributes to generating this master list of potential solutions. And you are going to write all of them down regardless of how ridiculous they may be. Just respectfully write all of them down. Once the list is completed, then as a group, you and the children are going to work together to come to an agreement on which of the solutions are going to work best for everybody involved. And then you're going to implement those solutions. It's then important to at some point follow up and kind of reassess with the kids, hey, is this working? But hopefully at that point, things are out in the open and you're working towards something that is making the situation better for everybody. And if not, then it might be time to sit down and reassess what's going on and go through a similar process to maybe come up with some new solutions. So the last couple of things we're going to discuss are a couple of tips for different areas, common issues that parents face when they have more than one child in the house. And the first one is tips for encouraging sharing. The first tip is to teach turn taking as opposed to forced sharing, which is what is typically done in a Montessori environment anyway. And that looks like a child taking a turn with a toy or an activity for as long as they need to until they feel they're done, and then allowing another child to have a turn after that. And the child is not rushed to finish their turn quickly so that the other child can have a turn. There is no timer set, and the parent is not a referee to say, okay, you have 5 minutes and then you have to give it to her so she can have 5 minutes. The child is allowed to work for as long as they need to. The other child is expected to ask permission if they want to use something or have a turn. And if the child says, I'm not done yet, then they are expected to wait their turn and find something else to do in the meantime. And with younger children, oftentimes you will need to help the other child wait their turn, or perhaps help them go through some sort of a tantrum or a meltdown as a result of being asked to wait their turn. But it is important that you do that. That is your role, is to leave the space open for them to have those feelings about needing to wait. That's developmentally normal for a child to react that way, but that is part of the process for learning how to take turns with another child. The one caveat to this, I would say, is that if you are having a play date come over your house, or you're going somewhere else for a play date, or if your child is in a group play session, maybe at the playground with other children, you would want to teach your child that they might not be able to take as long as they would want to. They might not be able to have a long turn, as you might call it, at home. You might need to teach them that at play dates and at the playground, we have short turns so that everybody has time to play with that toy or that activity before that time is over. And it would be helpful to remind your child before you go into these types of situations to remind them of the rule about short turns versus long turns so that they know what the expectation is going into it. And if your child forgets the rule, or if they just can't help themselves and they do not want to give up the toy or activity still during that play date or at the playground, then it will be up to you at that point to intervene and help make sure that that happens. Another way to encourage sharing that is probably better for older children is to put the kids in charge of determining how to share a resource themselves. So for example, if you have a bottle of bubbles, you can say, hey guys, we only have one bottle of bubbles. You're gonna have to figure out with each other how you wanna share it. You might also try pointing out the advantages of sharing. So maybe your children don't see right away that, oh, well, he has the red crayon and she has the blue crayon and together they can make purple, but you could point that out to them and it might be worth them trading and seeing that, yes, they can share the crayon colors. Another very effective way to encourage sharing is to model it yourself. And personally, I use this strategy all the time. It's really simple. An example I can think of for you right off the top of my head, my older child loves to have pretend tea parties all the time, complete with the little plates and cups and spoons and pretend food to go along with it. And oftentimes we're playing this together while her younger sister is nearby playing with something else. And many times my baby will take notice of what we're doing and she'll want to become involved in some capacity. And if I see her coming over, before she even has an opportunity to take something and potentially upset my older child unnecessarily because she's like, hey, mommy, I gave that to you, I will immediately offer something to the baby. And I'll say, here, Mia, do you want to have some of this and join our tea party? And I'll invite her in and share what I have with her. And so I model that for my older child so that she can see what that looks like. And finally, it's important to model genuine appreciation whenever your child shares spontaneously with you. So if you guys are having a snack together or a little treat and your child offers you a bite of whatever they have, just all on their own, of their own volition, you can say, hey, thanks for sharing a bite of that with me. That was really delicious. And just show that their actions had a positive effect on you. The next one is discouraging tattling. And it's really important for this to work is that you are not judging, you're not taking sides, and you are most certainly not doling out punishments based on one child telling on the other. It's really important for you to allow them, give them the opportunity to work out whatever is going on their own. And if they are older, I would say you would even want to encourage them to, hey, go try to work this out on your own, but let them know that if they do genuinely get stuck, they cannot move forward with whatever is going on, that they can come to you for help. You just don't want them to default to you as the referee every single time. The one thing that you do want to make clear though is that they should come get you right away if they ever see their sibling doing something that is potentially dangerous. The next one is discouraging one-upmanship. Basically what this is generally with older children, when they start to try to one-up each other in front of you as a means of vying for your approval. So you might have one child saying, oh, I swept the floor for mom today. And the other child says, oh yeah, well, I took out the garbage and the recycling for the last 4 weeks. And they're just kind of engaging in this competition to one-up each other. And the best way to discourage that from happening is to not play into it first and foremost, but then you can also, if possible, try to focus instead on what it is they did together. And you can say, yeah, well, you know what? Between the two of you, this house is really clean now. And finally, one of the most classic sibling battles is he took my blank, whatever the item might be that is considered personal property, and how to handle this idea of what is personal property and what is community property. And the first thing you want to do in this type of situation, especially with older kids, is to make sure that you're opening a discussion first about this idea of community property. You can use very easy examples to help explain this to your child. For example, you would say, hey, you know, if I got a new blender for our kitchen and I got it for Christmas, it was my present, but I put it in the kitchen. If dad wants to use the blender, that's okay. It's something that our family can use to help make yummy smoothies for us, and I'm not gonna get upset with him if he uses the blender. That's community property, even though it was technically mine. And you can point out the similarity between a situation like that and perhaps maybe some of the toys that your children play with together. That maybe those toys that are out in a shared common play space are considered community property. Everybody has the right to play with them. There is no that's mine, that's hers kind of situation happening. But there are going to be some items that your child might feel very strongly about, and that would be their personal property. So these could be recent acquisitions, something they received as a birthday gift or for a holiday, or maybe it's something that was a memento from a trip that's really special to them. Whatever it is to them that's personal and makes it special, that could be considered then personal property. And it might be helpful to have a family rule that you sit down and discuss and say, okay, anything that is out in the playroom, if you have one, or that's out in this particular room of the house, that's community property. Everybody has the right to use it. And maybe they keep their personal property, their personal possessions that they feel really protective of. Maybe those items stay in a special spot in their bedrooms where anyone who wants to use those items knows that if it's on that shelf or in that cubby in the closet, that it's special and they need to ask permission before they touch it. As long as everyone in the family sits down, you have this discussion and everyone's on the same page about this, it's a lot easier to deal with those types of situations. Those are all of the strategies that I have to share with you today. And if you are interested in learning anything more in depth about any one of the strategies that I mentioned, then I would highly encourage you to pick up the book where I learned about all of these strategies. And that is Siblings Without Rivalry. I love this book. It is incredible. Honestly, I gave you guys a lot of information, but the book itself goes into so much more detail and gives you so many real life examples that I'm sure you will be able to relate to, not just as a parent, but also as a sibling if you yourself have siblings that you grew up with. So I would suggest checking this book out if you feel like you need a little bit more to go off of. But the strategies that I've mentioned were basically my compilation of notes as I was reading this book. So I guess maybe you could think of this video almost as a Cliff's Notes for the book. But if you are interested in taking a deeper dive, I will leave a link to the book in the description box down below for you guys to check out. If you have something that you feel you want to contribute to the discussion, please leave it in the comments down below. If you liked today's video, please be sure to give it a big thumbs up. And just in case you are new to my channel, I did want to let you know that this video is part of a much larger series called Montessori at Home, which is aimed at providing practical tips and advice for busy parents like you and I for implementing Montessori philosophies at home with your children. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in learning more about, then you might consider subscribing to my channel. This way you don't miss a new video, because I upload a new one just like this one every single week. Thank you so much for watching today, and I'll see you next time. Bye!